Well, hello and welcome, everyone. Welcome to my world. I am Cedrick LaFleur, and I am your host. You're listening to Talk Leadership with Cedrick, and everybody needs a little TLC. And tonight, I am so excited to have you with us tonight. Our focus on the show is leadership and personal growth with business leaders, educators, and local thought leaders. Our goal is to introduce our audience to leaders who are making an impact with innovative ideas. Our guiding leadership principle is the law of contribution, which says growing yourself enables you to grow others. So you can't give what you don't have. So first, you must grow yourself in order to grow others. We believe that outstanding leaders like yourself help us to help others. So tonight, we have another dynamic leader with us, and he's actually on the show. This is the second time as a guest. Earlier this year, he was the host of the show, right? So welcome back, Mr. Joseph M. Nemmers, to the show. Welcome, Joe.
I liked it a lot better when I was in your chair. I got to ask you the question.
Yeah. See, you like that controls.
I do.
Joe Nemmers is an executive with over 4 decades of experience in the medical and pharmaceutical industries. He presently serves on the board of directors for his DNA Diagnostics Center in Cincinnati. And DNA Diagnostic is a leading DNA testing company. He is also on the advisory board of Perot Medical, a medical startup company in Boston, Massachusetts. Joe has worked in many different organizations, and I'm just going to list a few just to give context to our subject tonight. Right, so he has been like I said, a leader for over 4 decades. He's worked for a global private equity firm, Warburg Pincus, as an executive in residence and a senior advisor. He's also served at Abbott Laboratories for over 27 years, folks, all up and down the ranks within Abbott. And in 2006, he was appointed the executive vice president responsible for 5 Abbott's medical product businesses with over $3.5 billion in sales and 13,000 employees under his command. Joe also served in the United States Army and the Army Reserve from 1979 to 1993. He currently resides in Scottsdale, Arizona, with his wife, Kathy Rankin Nemmers, who is also an Abbott retiree. And together they have 9 children and 5 grandchildren. And folks, if you have 9 children and 5 grandchildren, you know about leadership, right? Because you have to lead a lot of people. So tonight, I am so excited, Joe, to have you here because tonight, folks, we're going to be talking about Joe's new book, 30 Observations on Leadership, right? And we're going to dive into the book and talk about it a bit. What I want to do, though, I want to start off with just a snippet of a summary in chapter 1 in your book, and then we're going to dive in and we'll have a conversation. So welcome to the show again. Now, here's what I like what you wrote, and I'm just going to read it, and then we'll talk about it. As we will review in later chapters, being a good leader means knowing not only your own job, but the responsibilities of those whom you supervise. And most critically, a good leader knows the people who work for him or her. As we've briefly seen here, these essential leadership traits can't happen if the leader sits on his behind in his office doing emails and buying things on Amazon. Good leaders are everywhere. Make it happen. Now, I kind of chuckled and laughed when I read that, but it just brought a lot of things to memory, to my mind. But the biggest thing is, Joe, you start off this book with this chapter, and it's called, the title of the chapter is Good Leaders Are Everywhere, right? And I love that concept. So why do you say good leaders are everywhere?
Well, first off, you started with the least mature quote that I have in the book.
I know, but it was
the rest of it is way more mature than that. I was trying to make a point. Well, the point of good leaders are everywhere is that employees, or when we were in the military, they have to see that you're there. To hide in your office doesn't do any good. And there's sort of a bunch of corollaries to good leaders are everywhere. But it mostly means that you're present, that you understand your business, you understand what they're doing. They can come to you if they have a problem, but that, I use the word omnipresent. It doesn't mean you're hovering over employees and watching everything they do. It just means that you're there, you're available. They know they take confidence in that, that you're aware of the situation, you're fluid with what's happening, which you can't do if you're not everywhere. And I talk in the book about when I came to Abbott Diagnostics. This is a big business, as you noted, 13,000 people in 120 countries. I couldn't be everywhere all the time. So I had to do other things. I did emails, I did all employee meetings, I traveled extensively. I taught my staff how to do some of this stuff, and then I sent them out to do it. But it's very important, I think, for leaders to be perceived as being omnipresent in a very positive way, where people can know they're there and not know they're hiding someplace or they're in some isolated place they've never seen. So it's a very critical part. And the reason I made it the first chapter was because all the other stuff that we're going to talk about flows from that. If a good leader isn't everywhere, then they can't possess a lot of the other qualities.
Yeah, and actually, since you said that word omnipresent, I've not heard that word used in the context of a leader, and I like that term. So I'm assuming there was some thought that went into this omnipresent word.
Right, there was, and it's, again, like I said, you don't want to send an impression to employees that the manager's hanging over their head all the time. That isn't really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about they project an image of being in control, that they understand the business, that they're guiding it competently. People take confidence from that. It makes it easier to do their jobs. But you have to be out there, and you have to be out there on email, you have to be out there on text, you have to be out there with meetings, you have to be seen, and it's very important.
Awesome. Now, you have, this is not your first book. This is not your first rodeo, right? You've written, 3 or 4 other books, right?
4, yeah. This is my first business book. The other ones are about myself or my family.
Okay, all right. So then what is it that made you decide, I'm going to sit down now and put out another book?
This book has the longest gestation period of any book I could think of. So the origin, the genesis of this book was a presentation I developed back in 2005 to help teach leadership to senior staff that I had in my expanded staff. And we didn't really have a lot of leadership training. I thought it was an important thing to do. I needed an additional tool, as I say in the book, to help with the business that we had at the time. And it was called 30 Observations on Leadership. I can explain that part of it later, but it was about a 2-hour presentation. I mean, there's 30 observations. If you take 4 minutes on each one, it's 2 hours. And the funny part was, that I gave that quite a bit, and I was very excited about it. It was generally met with good reviews. And I thought, I got to turn this into a book. But I didn't. I don't know why. And the funny part, the irony is that it was basically written. The 30 observations are essentially the outline of the book. I knew all the content because I knew what I wanted to say behind each one. One of the really kind of funny things about leadership, or not funny, but I think it's very salient, is it doesn't change much. The values of leaders don't change over time. So the things I was talking about 15 years ago are just as important today. I didn't really have to make, other than the Amazon comment, I didn't have to make a lot of comments about what was different because good leadership is timeless. Sure. But anyway, the thing sat there in the back of my head, and I would look at it every once in a while and go, I had the outline of it, I had the PowerPoint. I said, it's all, and I never got around to it. So I did write the other books. And then I think, as you know, I'm in graduate school. So I had my first class here this last fall, and the break was the 1st of December. And I had been writing for 7 weeks. And I thought, I'm going to keep going. If anyhow, I'm going to do it now. I'm going to resurrect the book, and I'm going to get it done. So I wrote from about the 1st of December till I got back here in January and finished it. So most of it was still in here. It hadn't gone away yet. But it's crazy that it just took so long. I have no explanation why.
Yeah, well,
I guess it was just waiting to ripen or something. I don't know.
I can attest to how fast you started writing it, because when you asked me about writing the foreword, which you're going to get to, Um, and you said, I'm like on chapter like 2 or 3 or something.
Right.
Then
You
all
just
of a
kept
sudden you
going.
said, yeah, hey, I'll be done with the book here in like by next week. And I was like, wait a minute, you just was on chapter 2. There's 30 chapters.
Well, the good point was I already knew what I wanted to say. It was just, having to shape the words and get it in the right format. But so it just took a long time. And I have a lot of friends like you who knew that I had this stuff on ice for years and years and years. And a number of them just kept, poking at me, when are you going to get it done? So I had a window, and I thought, if I don't do it now, I'm not going to get it done in 2021. So
Right. Wow. Well, that is awesome. So, and then the name, why 30 observations on leadership?
well, I point out in the book that I'm not smart enough to go. Yeah, I could only think of 30. I couldn't think of 31. They just happened to be the ones that I thought were critically important. And it's kind of fun to step back and look and say, I have other books on leadership to see, how many did I cover that were probably still appropriate. But 30 was the number that I thought of. And the book is divided into 3 sections of 10. So there's a section 1, which has the first 10, second 10, and so forth. And I learned after the first presentation, when I gave this way back when I put 30 observations on the screen, people's eyes just went like this. And then they were doing mental countdowns for me to go from 1 to 30. And I thought, that's not going to work. So I did the first 10, the second 10, and that works a lot better. And that's how the book is divided up. But it was what I was thinking at the time. It covered a lot of the things that I had learned up to that point. I did add a few things. I've learned 1 or 2 things in the last 15 years, but it just was a good number. And I say in the introduction that there's probably 1,000 observations.
Sure.
I'm not bold enough to say there's only 30, but these are the ones that were important to me and that seemed to resonate with audiences when I would physically talk to them about it. And I thought, well, what the heck?
Yeah, might as well go for it. You're right. Well, I'll tell you what, folks, when the book is available to purchase, you definitely need to get this book. I spent the weekend reading the book, and let me tell you what, it's an interesting read. It's a relatable read. So when I say relatable, what I'm saying is when you see the examples that he used in the book, you will see how it's very relatable no matter what industry you're in. And you'll see something in someone else that that is a leader that's doing some of the exact same thing. So very relatable. It's going to be a book that I guarantee you, when you buy this book, you're going to say, "Oh, I have to buy this for someone else as well." Right? There's just so many stories in it, and stories really help make things more interesting and fun and all of those things. So great job there.
Can we talk about stories for a minute, since
you're absolutely.
We were talking about when I took responsibility for Abbott Diagnostics, and the business was in a bit of a challenge. And there was a lot of work to be done to get everybody on the same page. There were a lot of messages that had to be sent. And one of the things I learned pretty quickly was that people, especially when you're trying to send a message out across a business that exists in all these different continents in 120 countries, and you're dealing with people in different cultures. It may be Abbott, but they speak a different language, they have a different culture. Is what's the one thing you can do to have one thing that you can talk to them about? And the answer was stories. If you tell people stories, everybody remembers a story. You never remember a PowerPoint you remember my 30 observations, but those are stories. Right. But you never remember a PowerPoint presentation. That's really boring. But if you tell stories, it resonates with people. And that's what we did for a big part of our communication to help bring that business back, was telling stories.
Yes.
Putting it in relatable form for people so that it went across cultures, it went across languages, it went across time zones.
Yes.
And it's an important thing. And so you and I were talking in the pre-show. I said, this would have been a really boring book if I would have said things like, hey, you know what? Character is everything. Go do it. Or good leaders are everywhere. Or good leaders pay attention to detail. And then that was the end of it. I mean, like, okay. But you have to have a story that's relatable to it, because readers will remember that. And I think that's what makes, in this case, leadership come alive.
Absolutely. And they'll remember, even if it's just snippets, right, of what you said. And, I can remember back in, it seems like a long time ago.
It was.
05 and 04 and 05, I think it was. And maybe even a little bit early in that. But it was, you would always say to us, hold until relieve.
Yeah, that was a military term. Had to do some explaining about that one, but it was a military term.
Yeah, well, but it was good. It was a good way to help people really stay focused on what they were doing. Just hold on to what you're doing right now until relief, right? So it was a simple message, and it still sticks with me till this day.
Good, keep holding.
Okay. So I know, Joe, you have had dozens of people, hundreds of people that you could have selected to write the forwards for your book. Rhonda, Luniak Walker, boom, I can easily understand that and see that. And so why Rhonda? And then you asked me to also write a forward. Why Cedrick LaFleur?
Well, it's kind of like trying to pick your favorite kid. There's no way to do that. And you two were responsible for me getting this book finally finished. I mean, you were encouraging me from the beginning, and you've been an inspiration to me with the work that you've taken on post-Abbott. And then Rhonda has always been my writing mentor and coach. She was our communications person at Abbott when I ran the business. But she's a great writer. She's a trained writer, and she's always encouraged me, pushed me, edited me, and so forth. And so you two were the only really obvious choice to want to do that, because you understood what I was trying to do. And so I asked both of you to do it.
Awesome. Well, it was definitely an honor and a privilege to be able to write the foreword to your book, but it was it came with some heavy burdens, because trust me, I said, okay, I'm going to do this. I was going to say no, but I told my wife, I said, Joe has asked me to write this forward. I've never written a forward for a book before. What am I going to write about? Right. And
you did a great job.
I remember you and I went through communication. I said, oh yeah, I'll have it done by this time. But I was really, I wanted to make sure I did a good job for you. Right. Because you asked me to do this. And but it was amazing. So folks, here's what I want to, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I want you to understand something. When someone asks you to do something and you have a lot of respect for that person and you decide to do that, then you got to commit to it. And here's the thing that I want you to know. It was a lot. I had to think about this a lot. But here's what is the amazing thing that happened. When I finally sat down to just start writing, it just flowed. It was just like I was just meant to write it. And everything just came out and flowed, and it was just boom. Now I had to go and get some people to edit it and all this stuff. But yeah, so my point is, folks, when you set out to do something, don't worry about it too much. Don't overthink the process, right? Just do what you think you can do your best, and then deliver on what you committed to. So thank you very much for trusting me with that.
Well, and for the viewers who haven't seen the book or read the foreword, Cedrick did a wonderful thing. Number one, he compared me to his grandfather, which, on the face of it, I'm like, okay, wait a minute, I'm not that old. But of course, it was wonderful because your grandfather was someone you greatly admired and has changed your life. But I thought, your grandfather, how about somebody a little more contemporary? But when I read it, I was very touched because it was a very nice tribute. You're talking about when writing starts to flow. People, ever since this stuff came out, have asked me, how do you write a book? And well, there's the mechanical part of how to write it, but it's really all about when you're ready to go, it will happen, and you'll just start to write. I call it the muse. When the muse finds me, the muse found me at the end of December, at the beginning of December, and I said, I better get going because I'm not going to stop. Because if I stop, I don't know if I'm going to start again. So when the muse happens, the spirit moves you, you just go. That's what happened to you. You just went and kept writing.
Yeah, well, that was definitely it's a very, very good book. So can't wait for it to come out for people to get it. So one of the people that you write about, well, actually you dedicated the book to, is General Dick Sterney, right? So it's obvious he made an impact in your life, on your life. And so help us understand how did his impact, how did his influence impact your leadership style or decisions you've made?
Well, one of the things I enjoyed about being in the Army Reserve while I was at Abbott was I got a chance to see things at sort of an accelerated rate before it happened to me as a leader. I had a lot of responsibility as a young officer, way more before I did at Abbott. So I had a chance to practice and do things and observe leadership. I worked for 3 years as General Sterney's aide. General officers typically have an officer who's an aide, and I worked for him for 3 years. He was a 2-star general. He ran the 86th Army Reserve Command, which at the time was the second biggest reserve command in the Army. So it was 17,000 soldiers in 17 states. And it was a readiness command, meaning shortly after I worked for him, they went to Desert Storm and Desert Shield and so forth. So it was a big job, very serious. And I learned a lot by watching him operate in a very large group. He had a big command staff. You can imagine 17,000 people, quite a big number of subordinate commanders. And I would go to conferences and we would go to meetings and I would watch him perform this big, giant, complicated organization and how he managed it and the principles that he stood by. And so he's been my friend and my mentor for, 35 years now, 36 years, and has continued. He will send me books on leadership. He sends me books on all kinds of things. We talk all the time, and I get a chance to see him whenever I come to Chicago. But he's a great man, and the very embodiment of very thoughtful, quiet, practical leadership. But like a lot of the things I say in the book, I had a chance to sort of sit alongside or work under some really remarkable people who were great leaders, and I absorbed a big part of it. And I dedicated the book to him largely for that reason. I learned just way so much from him. So there's many things in the book. There's one chapter on character where I quote him in there as part of that observation. But and he called me this morning because I sent him the book last week, and he was very excited to talk to me. And we talked for about an hour. And he said, everything that's in here are all the things that I believed. Now he's 25 years older than me, and that he thought were important in the military. And I said, well, that's because you taught them to me. That's why. But we talked about how these things have a perfect parallel in the civilian world. And one of the things I did want to talk about was the one challenge to writing the book was, I talk about where my influences come from. And I would say the largest influence on me in leadership was the Army. The second was watching people at Abbott, and the third is from reading, particularly about great people, great leaders. But the hard part is translating military experience so that civilian audiences can understand it, and not using necessarily military terms or language, but trying to express the same things. And you and I were talking earlier, you were in the Air Force. We have friends watching tonight from Abbott colleagues that were in the military. We can all talk to each other and talk military, and we all know what we're saying. There's no translator that's needed. But when you try to take those stories and apply them to people who've never served, it's a little harder to do.
Sure.
And so a lot of it was just simply trying to break the stories down in a way that's relatable. Some of them I couldn't do anything about. That's just the way they happened. But General Sterney and I talked this morning about how much of this stuff that we learn is truly applicable in the civilian world, in the real world.
Yeah.
So he's a great guy. He's been my friend and my mentor. He's like my second dad. He's just a wonderful promoter of ideas. He's a lifelong learner. He's someone you would really enjoy meeting because he never stops learning. And he still stays in touch with so many of his former Army friends.
Wow.
So that's why I dedicated the book to him.
Well, that is awesome and very thoughtful as well. So in times when you were making decisions throughout your career, did you find that you had moments where maybe something he said to you came to mind, or you were trying to think through something and something he said came to mind for you?
Well, in his case, and in the case of some of the senior people I worked with at Abbott before I became a senior person, it was just simply remembering what they did and how they acted and how they held themselves and the things that they talked about. We talked in an earlier conversation about the word bearing. Bearing is how you hold yourself. It's how you conduct yourself. It's the confidence with how you walk and how you speak and how you talk to people. And I learned a lot of that, and I know you did too in the military. And watching really great leaders do that. And then when you ascend the stage and have to do the same thing, I just mimicked what they did. It seemed to work. Good. I don't know. Yeah. Now, there were moments when, this is sort of interesting, is that when I got higher in the organization and I was confronted with things I'd never seen before. I went back to mentors I had when I first started. And I think there's a lesson there. Again, they had great advice for me, even though they never exceeded to that level. That wasn't what I was asking them. I was asking them very fundamental questions about leadership. And the people who taught me early on in my career advised me much later in my career when I was at a much higher level. And the advice was still solid. And those are the ones I went to because they were the ones I worked for the longest, I trusted the most, and frankly had the best experience. And so, the mentor pool, you can dip into it lots of different ways. And why I'm pointing this out is when it's not just a leadership lesson, I think it's a mentoring lesson. The higher you go, you don't always have to have mentors that are at a higher level than you. You can always have mentors that you knew many years ago. That may not even be in business, for example. Might have been a neighbor, might have been somebody else. But if you trust their judgment, their vision, their advice, go to them. And I did.
Absolutely.
And so I did go to him, a number of times. I still go to him for things,
Yeah, I absolutely love that advice. And folks, let me make sure you heard that, right? He said you don't have to always have mentors who are ahead of you. It could be someone that is right alongside you. They could be, a step behind you. They could be from in the past, right? If you need advice, and he said, if you trust that person, then you can go to them and have this conversation, right?
One of the things I talk about in the book as we get into this is if you think that, especially if you're a leader, we tend to grow up thinking people older than us have all the wisdom and knowledge, right? And that works to a certain point until in your career. You get to a point and it's like now the older people might be working for you. If you always equate age with intelligence, you're going to have a problem. Because not everybody who's older is smarter. Look at you and me. We're perfect.
Right.
You have to equate it to the person and their experience. And they could be much younger than you and be far wiser. So don't exclude anybody. It's an inclusionary process when it comes to mentoring and leading and picking leaders. Good leaders, as I talk about in here, can be someone that's way younger than you are and with far less experience. But, they just have certain traits that makes them a better leader.
Yes, absolutely. We always say that evaluated experience is the best teacher, not just experience, right?
Right.
And it's interesting that you talk about this because I was just mentoring a young guy, and he was worried about taking his promotion in his company, and he said, Cedrick, I'm used to technical sales versus the sales team that I'm going to be over if I take this job. He says, but the other thing is all of them are older than me. So we had that conversation. That doesn't matter. If you can influence them, then you can lead them, right? And so it was trying to help him think through the right way to evaluate this position or not, if it's the right fit for him or not. So it's interesting that you say that.
Well, look at you and me. I mean, you're way younger than me, but I look up to you for a number of different things, and I ask you for advice on stuff. So age is not relevant in the process.
Sure, absolutely. One of the things I really like about the book is that you use a lot of real names. A lot of times authors will change the name to protect the innocent. That's what they say, right? And to me, it made the book, again, I go back to that relatable word, and it was perfect to give context to what good leadership looks like, right? So why did you decide to use the real names of the individuals?
I've been around a long time, Cedrick. I know all about litigation. So I only put names of people in there that I really like. I tell good stories about them. There's no bad stories about anybody who's named. And the one person that I had a little reference to, I changed his name. But the rest of them are all real people, and I say very nice things about them, so I ain't worried about it.
I got that. That's actually a good point. So I'll remember that when I write my book.
Yes, always keep litigation in mind.
Oh man. So dive into chapter 1 of this book, and what we're going to do, folks, is just highlight a couple of the chapters. But I want to remind you, I want you to look at this book: 30 observations on leadership. And it'll be out, Joe, you said what, in spring?
Yeah, in the springtime. I'm waiting on a couple of things. I have done a first print, which was for family and friends, and then I'm waiting on a few things from the publisher, and then we'll be able to put it out there.
Awesome. Well, when this book comes out, I'm going to remind you folks, when it's out, you're definitely going to want to have this book in your library when you're talking about leadership, right? And this is not just definitions of what a great leader, they have character, they have charisma, and it's not about that, right? It's going to be some real world examples that you may be able to even use to help you as you go through your leadership journey. You may be going through something and this book may help you. You may tear up because you relate to a story so much that it just bring this emotion out of you. I guarantee you one thing, it's a very good read. And I don't want to use the word easy read, but it is in terms of understanding. It's not so complex that you can't understand it. So I love the word relatable in this context. So chapter 1, good leaders are everywhere. And we talked about this word omnipresent. And I really like that. I never used that word in context of leadership. So
listen, Cedrick, if anybody is omnipresent, it's you. I can't turn on Facebook or YouTube. You appear everywhere, and not just with TLC. You've got radio. I lose track of how many things. You're the omnipresent social media person. So the word defines you very easily.
So I have some friends of mine and business partners of mine who are watching, and they're probably going to start using that word with me then, because they talk about that all the time.
It's true.
Before COVID, I was nowhere on
I know
on video.
And look at you now.
So Captain Charlie, is it Lieb?
Lieb, yeah.
Yeah, Captain Charlie Lieb is another person that you mentioned in this book and a couple of the books. And so tell us a little bit about Captain Lieb, his leadership style, what stands out about him, and maybe what's unique about him.
Well, I put him in the chapter in the book, the part about leaders are everywhere. I'll tell you the story in a second. But I was an ROTC, a Reserve Officers Training Corps in college. And between junior and senior year, even to this day, you go to something called advanced camp. It's 6 weeks. It's the same thing essentially as basic training for enlisted people, but a lot more intense. And it's graded. And it's your grade in that 6 weeks largely determines what happens to you a year later when you're commissioned, in terms of your duty assignment, in terms of your branch selection and so forth. So it's a very intense 6 week period, and you're being watched all the time. Well, Charlie was our advisor, our company commander for our platoon. We had 41 guys. And if you ever see one of these things, these are 40, in my case, 41 guys who were all very bright, very competitive, very athletic. Everybody wanted to be a soldier and all competing for the top grade in the platoon. And so Charlie was the one who would eventually grade us. And he was a great officer. He was West Point graduate, Vietnam veteran, and a tough guy. And he wrote us pretty good for 6 weeks, and we all great respect for him. And I told the story about one time, one of the things they made us do, I mean, we never even really hardly went to bed. So we get up at 5 a.m, we train all day, come back, and sometimes we had other duties. And one night I had sentry duty, which is like the worst thing that can happen, because we're at Fort Lewis, Washington, in the middle of nowhere. No one's going to come and find us, but we have to have sentry duty. And you have to memorize standing orders. It's just the way they do it in the Army. I will stand my post. I will do this. I will do that. And we had to have them memorized. So one night I'm out at some godforsaken place under a single light bulb guarding some building at 10 o'clock at night after I've been training all day. And here comes Charlie, our company commander. And I mean, he could have been in bed 3 hours before, but he went around and checked all of us that were on those sentry positions. He came up and he challenged me, and he said, "What are the 7 orders?" I gave it to him. And then he looks at me and he goes, "When was the last time you shaved?" I said, 5 o'clock yesterday morning. "Next time before you go on sentry duty, I expect you to be shaved." And he turns around and walks away. But the point was, and he went and did that with 6 other people that were there. Now, he could have been in bed. He was out there for a long day, but he didn't do that. He was everywhere. And he did this all the time. He would appear in places that I had no idea how he got there, but he was watching us and making sure that we knew we were being evaluated. He was there to help us. But there's a great story on him. So this was 1976. So I lost track of him. And one of my best friends that I met that summer, I'm still friends with, and he challenged me to find Charlie. And I did. And it happened to be the time when I was starting to date Kathy Reinke, and she lived in Green Bay. And I found out Charlie lived in Green Bay, and he lived 3 miles from Kathy. And as it turned out, he left the Army a number of years after I saw him, and he became a very successful business guy. He was on the board of the Packers, and I had lunch with him multiple times since then after not seeing him in 40 years. Wow. And I tell him these stories about himself. You know, he just starts laughing because he never saw himself that way. But he was the epitome of good leaders are everywhere. He somehow could be in all these different places, that all this different training we were doing. I don't know how he did it, but there he was. And I took great confidence from that. I said in the book, it's really great to have a leader. I mean, if he was in the BOQ all day sleeping, what the heck good would he be to me? But I use it as an example of what good leaders are everywhere. And he was a very important part of my life at a very critical time in my life.
Well, that is.
I put him in the book.
Yeah, that is awesome. So now I do have a question for you, right? Yeah. So now you're a tall guy. You're not a short guy like myself, right?
No.
All right, broad shoulders. And you're walking on sentry duty. Folks, I want you to imagine this. He's in his military gear, sentry duty, tall guy, has a rifle that's fully loaded, all this stuff. And he said,
it wasn't loaded. I had a rifle, but it was
oh, you had one bullet? You were like 40?
No, like Barney Fife, I had the one.
so
my bullet right here. I kept it, Cedrick. There it is with me.
You say you were on sentry duty, and you say in the book that Captain Lee nearly scared the death out of you. And I'm like, this guy has a big rifle in his arm. How are you going to be scared?
Well, who thinks somebody's going to come at him out of the darkness in the middle of the night with a single light bulb, much less him? And it wasn't that I was physically scared of him. It was that I was being evaluated all the time.
Yeah.
I wanted a good grade.
I just thought it was funny. I said, I'm going to have to understand how this happens. Now, sentry duty. So and this is a military people, and maybe a little bored to our audience. I don't know, but help me understand sentry duty. Now, there's a story of in Russia they had guards guarding this field for like 40 years, but they were doing it because traditionally that's what they've done.
Yeah.
But it was because someone said, like the commander came in and said, there's these flowers that are growing and we don't want anyone to smash those 40 years before, but they still had someone guarding that field that no one knew why. So I'm assuming that's not what you guys were doing.
No, they just did it to screw with us. I mean, they're trying to push us to the limit. We've been up since 5 a.m. You get back, you think you're going to be able to have evening meal and then, prepare for the next day. And they're like, no, you're on guard duty till 1 a.m. It's like, ugh. But it was all part of the process over 6 weeks of really stretching, pushing, seeing what people could do.
Awesome. See, this is why I went to the Air Force, folks.
Yeah, I know. You know what they say about the Air Force? Whenever they move to a new location, before they even build an airstrip, they build an officers club and an NCO's club.
Absolutely.
First.
Absolutely.
And then they build the runway.
Absolutely. So as we go along in the book, and we'll skip from chapter 1 and go all the way to chapter 16. And I love the title. It says, good leaders take responsibility and offer no excuses. Yeah. I absolutely love that title of that chapter. So why do you think some leaders make excuses or offer excuses up?
Well, they're not very good leaders, I mean, I present the question in the book. I mean, how would you like to work for somebody who just makes excuses? I mean, you couldn't be the CEO of a company and make excuses. It doesn't work. You either accept responsibility and fix it, or they find somebody different. And it's really, it's no different than in our personal life. We don't try to make excuses for things as parents or as neighbors or as, whatever. It's just not a good thing to do. And I talk in here too about, a little bit later on, talk about if you got a problem, also offer a solution. It's kind of the same thing. Just don't offer the problem and then run away, and I have to do the solution. It's the same thing. Good leaders take responsibility. They don't offer any excuses and you just get it fixed.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to ask this question, and then I see a fan of yours, and you don't know this person, but she's a fan because of something that you said to me And she says, I'm never going to forget that, Cedrick. But the question is, how does a leader who make excuses, how does it impact morale on a team?
Oh, it's terrible. I mean, none of us would want to work for somebody who makes excuses, especially when we know what the answers are. And then typically employees know exactly what happened when there was an issue, and the management sometimes doesn't. But it's not a good thing. It doesn't. We talk later in the book about character. And one of the points I make about the book is all 30 of these observations are interrelatable. They're not separate and apart from each other. They're all a component of each other. And, character is a big reason why leaders don't make excuses, because that's not something that somebody with character does. You just take it and you deal with it and you move on. But, I mean, it is bad for morale. It's a good question, because it's a terrible thing to stand up there and do that and then expect people to follow you.
Yes, absolutely. 100% agree with you. So a good friend of mine, and a business partner of mine, Joanna Rincon, I see that she's on, and she says, Cedrick, I'm never going to forget what he said. He says, I'm going to always use this. And this was when we were here in Harris County, and we were walking in the building. You said, walk in the building like you own it.
Yeah.
And she said, I'm never going to forget that. I'm going to remember that all the time. So she said, I'm definitely going to be on tonight because I like what he said.
There's more in the book.
Yes, and we're talking tonight, folks, with the author of 30 Observations on Leadership, Mr. Joseph Nemmers. And this book is going to be out in the springtime. So when it comes out, we'll definitely let you know when it's out. And you definitely want to have this book on your shelf for leadership books. We talk about the stories that are in the book. It's just awesome. So we jump now to chapter 25, and chapter 25 says, good leaders find, develop, and prize talent. Now, the words that you decide to use, I find interesting, and I love that. So, one, this is the chapter that I think my name made it into, right? And I was like, whoa, okay.
It is.
When you're reading the book and you're not expecting to see your name in there, then you see your name and you go, whoa, I'm right here. Okay.
I just did it to surprise you.
But I love the leading quote by Harvey Firestone in this chapter. The growth and development of people is the highest calling of leadership. Right.
And the guy made some pretty good tires too, didn't he?
Yeah.
He must have hired some good people.
Must have. So, good people make the difference between winning and losing on a team, right? So why do organizations struggle in this area?
I don't know. It's like asking, why does the sun come up in the east? I don't know. But they do, and this is why people write books on leadership. It's difficult to understand, especially when you are experienced in an organization that doesn't have the problem.
Yeah. I always wonder, is it because they can't find good people truly, or is it they don't spend the time trying to develop the people that they have on the team?
I think it's all the above, which is why the title of the chapter says what it does. You have to find them, you have to develop them, you have to reward them. Finding them is hard enough, as you know, but when you do find them, you have to train them, you have to make sure they're rewarded properly, they're properly recognized, because it's a cycle. It just continues. It can't be. It's like the other things we talk about in the book. They're not independent of each other. Just finding good talent alone isn't going to solve the problem.
Right.
You have to make sure that they feel prized and that they feel like they're trained and ready to go.
Right. Well, one of the things I wrote down in the margin when I was reading this chapter was, do you have 8s and 9s coming in the room, or do you have 1s and 2s coming in the room? You see, because if you have 8s and 9s on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being lowest, 10 being highest, you have 8s and 9s coming into your room, coming into your organization, then you're in a good position. Yeah. But if you have 1s and 2s coming in, it's going to be a long.
Well, and you and I have both been in organizations with 1s and 2s, or we've inherited organizations with 1s and 2s. And it takes a long time, to either make sure they're going to work or not. And if they're not going to work, then you got to find somebody different. There's equal challenges with 8s, 9s, and 10s. And, man, I could write a book about managing high-performing people, because it is a whole different skill set. Sure. That a lot of managers don't know how to manage high-performing people. They just kind of punt, and that's not fair to the employee. But I'd rather worry about 8, 9s, and 10s than I would, 1s and 2s.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you'll see.
I always said I'd rather hold somebody back who's very aggressive than to keep pushing somebody who doesn't want to do something. I mean, I don't have the energy for that.
Yes, absolutely. So, Joe, a lot of times what I find is organizations will promote a individual who is like high performing, right?
Right.
But then they promote them and say, okay, now you're in a position to make decisions, just make decisions, versus promoting that person, but then setting them up for success by training them on how to be a leader of people now, because it's two different skills.
Well, you're in a business that exists because companies do a very poor job on their own of doing what you just suggested. We don't do a very good job of training people. I mean, we do a pretty good job of finding good people, but we don't do a great job of training them and getting, and training isn't just technical skills. It's, as someone exceeds up the ladder, you become a sales rep, become a sales manager, a sales director, whatever. They need leadership training. They need to understand what are those next steps going to look like and what's going to be expected, not just the functional training part. And, I wrote this book because there's a vacuum. You do what you do every day because there's a vacuum in employee development. There's no question.
Absolutely. So that's one of it is one aspect of it is on the employee side. I mean, on the company side, but the other side is it's on the employee. So what can individuals do, or what should individuals do to become a better leader if their company, let's say their company doesn't have a good training program for them?
Well, you got to pay attention to you and me. That's the first place I'd start. Well, with you, because you're on the air 24 hours a day. But, and we've all found ourselves in situations, even working for a great company like Abbott, sometimes there's sort of you're in a job or you're in an organization, there's a dearth of leadership for a moment. You have to go out and find it. I always tell people all the time, which is a different subject, which is to volunteer in the community, because you get on volunteer boards with people from around the community. A lot of times they're high performing people. You can observe it. I learned a great deal from working in the community on boards with some fabulous people that didn't work where I worked. They were people who worked in all kinds of different businesses. And it's a great way. It's free. You surround yourself with terrific talent. You get to watch leadership examples. And the other, of course, is to read and reach out. And, the interesting thing today versus when I started, and to some extent when you started, is the plethora of resources that are available at the touch of a finger to do something. You don't have to go buy books all the time, although you should buy mine and whatever you're going to do. But it's free. I mean, it's everywhere. Anybody with a brain and a little bit of intention can sit down, get on the internet, and think through what you want to do. There's resources all over the place. And, I talk in the book about, where do we find leaders? And I made the point at the end of the book, we look for leaders where we look for heroes, which is on all the wrong places. We look to the wrong people. We need to look to the people that are strong, proven leaders. Leaders are your next door neighbor. They can be your aunt or your uncle, in your case, your grandfather. You don't have to be somebody we work for. So to answer your question even a little bit farther, people just have to keep their eyes open. The greatest amount of learning you can ever do is by observing other people and their behaviors. That's the best thing you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree with that. And in today's environment, there's so many resources available. And now you don't have to go to the library. You're right in your own house and pull up.
Right.
Yeah.
Anything.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last chapter that we're going to kind of cover tonight in the book, and folks, again, we're talking with Joe Nemmers, who's the author of 30 Observations on Leadership. And this is definitely going to be a book you want to have in your leadership library. And there's so many great stories in each one of those 30 observations that you're going to be able to relate to those. Something is going to trigger in you when you read the book. Chapter 19, powerful chapter, and because I know you, I know that this chapter meant a lot for you, from not necessarily writing a book, but in terms of in your career, some decisions that you made. And the title of the chapter is "Good Leaders Believe in Inclusion," right? And I love the book, but however, in this one chapter, you point out where I'm not going to say that Abbott was like the front runner in this, but I know for diagnostics division within Abbott, diagnostics probably was a front runner in this area because of your leadership and guidance. And a lot of organizations still struggle in this area. And so why was this so important to you in terms of inclusion? And when I say inclusion, folks, I don't just mean Black and brown people. Inclusion means a lot of different things from a diversity standpoint. Okay.
Well, one of the things, and I talked about this when I was working, first off, I inherited a number of businesses, and when I would walk in for the first time and had a meeting, if everybody looked like me, I knew I was in trouble, because I knew there was not going to be diversity of thought, of opinion, of experience, and all of those things are necessary to solve problems or to grow a business. It doesn't matter what business application you're looking at, whether you're in trouble, you're growing so fast, you have to have the best and brightest ideas, and if everyone looks and talks and has come from the same place, you're not going to get that. And I tried very hard to distribute that. And so I also make the point, inclusion is very good and diversity is very good for business. I don't advocate it simply because it's a productivity tool. I also do it because I think it's the right thing to do. And I think we always, as leaders, have to put ourselves in the positions of the people we lead. And everybody wants a voice. Everybody wants to be heard. Nobody wants to be ignored. Everybody wants a seat at the table. Everybody wants to know that they're important, their ideas are important, they can contribute. And anywhere we don't do that, for whatever reason we do it, because of what you look like, where you came from, or whatever, or your gender, that's wrong. And it's not, we live in the 21st century, we should be smarter and better than that. And so I know it works. It works for a lot of different reasons. And when you make it work right, it works for the business, it works for individuals, it's a good leadership example. But it's critically important. It was important, I think, like I said, from a business perspective, it was also on a human level important. We started a couple of affinity networks that didn't exist before that ended up being not only important to the groups that they represented, but they also did a lot of great stuff for the business at the same time and help prove their worth, which was terrific. But it does come down to this whole notion of, can you imagine a time in your life coming up in the Air Force or in what you're doing now where you always want to be heard. You don't want someone to say, well, that's just Cedrick, forget about it. We don't want to do that. Nobody wants to be treated that way. Not in our own life. We don't want to be treated that way at work. So inclusion has, as you noted, a lot of different aspects to it. But I think the biggest thing for leaders is to have an open mind, is to have open arms, is to make sure that everyone feels welcome and that we get the best ideas out of everybody. And then we're all happy if we can do that.
Yes, absolutely. 100%. And I do love the quote that you put in there that everyone wants to be heard. Everyone wants a seat at the table. And folks, if you're listening tonight and you're a leader, right, I want to encourage you to just sit down and have a conversation with someone that is different than you.
Right.
Right. And just listen to them. And I guarantee you what's going to happen is you're going to find out a lot of things that maybe you didn't even know, you hadn't even thought about. I'll give you an example of just diversity in thoughts. So Joanna is the same person I was talking about earlier, is helping me launch this new product. And we have some parts of it. Part of the program is going to be in Spanish and in English. Right. Well, tonight I was telling about a new video that we had made and was all excited about it. And I was demoing a video for her. And she said, "Do you have this in Spanish?" Uh-oh. I hadn't even thought about it, right? It just didn't come. See, so this is diversity in thought, right?
Well, no in Spanish is the same in English, Cedrick. So the answer was no.
Yeah, so I said thank you very much for reminding me of that. So by this Friday, I've already contacted the company. We're gonna have that video in Spanish. So perfect example. Now, why do you think, Joe, on the other hand, and I know you don't, no one really understands it, but why do you think some people are so resistant to this inclusive practices?
I don't know. I mean, the good news is, if you think back, like when I started in 1980, there's a lot less of them. And I think there's a lot less, and there's a lot less making noise and causing trouble. I'd like to think there's just a lot less of them, but I mean, they're still there. Why they do it, I have no idea. I think change is hard for everybody, and they manifest it. And one of the things I found when we were doing some of this stuff in our business was that the people who resisted everything. I mean, it just wasn't inclusion. They resisted any kind of change that we were trying to do with the business. So there's something in there that I don't understand that prevents them from embracing things. But they just didn't pick this.
Yeah.
Everything. They were just complaining about all kinds of stuff.
Resistance a lot. Well, I like the tool that you used.
Well, you have to say this, but then you have to set the right perspective. So what Cedrick was talking about, I said in the book that we had a few people. I mean, we had 13,000 people, but we only had a few that were causing issues on this. And like I said, they caused issues on other things, and most of them ended up working someplace else.
So it's amazing, Joe, but this hour has just like flown by. But we are talking to Joseph Nemmers, the author of this great book, 30 Observations on Leadership. And you definitely want to have this book in your inventory when it in your library when it comes out. It'll be in the spring. We'll definitely keep you informed of that. But Joe, what's next for you? I mean, 4 books, and you travel all the time. What's next?
Well, I'm in graduate school, at Arizona State online for my master's in history, and I'm in the middle of almost to the end of this current class. These classes are 7 weeks; they're kind of compressed. So I'm finishing this up, and the emphasis is once again entirely on writing. And this is all. Last week, for 5 days, I had a stack of books on my desk this big. So that wraps up in about another 2 weeks, and then I have 5 classes in total this year throughout. They're in sequence throughout the year, so that's a big part of what I do. And so I'm in here where you see me, researching and writing and doing stuff a good part of every day. But that's a lot of fun. I mean, it was a good thing to do last year, kind of starting it at the height of COVID. But it's been a really enjoyable thing to do. But it takes a lot of my time. I am thinking about another book. The first book I wrote was my family history of my mom and my dad's side. And that took about 2.5 years. And it's a lot different writing a book like that than freestyling it on family stories and things like observations. And so that was my side of the family. And I had called it Volume 1. And Volume 2 I was going to follow up, was my late wife side of the family. And I have all the stuff. And I kind of applied the same logic to that I did to this book and said, I've been hanging out there for 8 years. I better get this one written. So I have most of it. So in between classes, I'm going to fill in time writing her family side of the story, which will take a while. But.
Yeah. So see, folks, when you retire, you're busier than you are when you work.
Oh, it's true. It's true. I've hardly met, and I will say this about avid retirees in particular, but I've never met one that said they were bored. And then they all say the same thing. I'm busier now than when I worked. Yeah. Except we're having more fun.
Yeah, yeah. I almost called and told them, like, give me a job so I can get some rest.
That's right. Especially you. You're on all hours of the day.
Yes. So when the book becomes available, Joe, definitely send us a link so we can actually.
I will. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great read, folks, and so I want to make sure that you do get that. Again, looking for stories, looking for examples of what a good leader looks like. You're going to find that in this book, and I'm not just plugging a book. I'm just telling you what's in the book. So I hope that you do find the time to get the book when it comes out. Joe, anything else you want to leave the audience with before we wrap up?
No, just keep your minds open, keep growing, keep learning, be a continuous learner like you and I talk about all the time. Be a lion.
Awesome.
Be a lion.
Thank you very much for coming on the show. And I look forward to the book release. And hey, folks, in April, Joe's wife, Kathy, is going to be on the show. April is our Women Empowerment Month, and she's going to help kick off the month. And she's a dynamic leader in herself. So we look forward to this. Remember, folks, I tell you, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Don't be on the menu. Good night.